Welcome to Subject to Power. I'm Elle Kamihira. Today, we're going to talk about witches and witch hunts again, but not the ones we usually talk about, not the ones hundreds of years in our past, namely the persecutions, torture, and mass murder of women, just to call it what it was, that took place in Europe and America in the name of witch hunting long ago. The witch hunts we're talking about today are very much current, very much happening in this modern time. My guest today is Professor Govind Kelkar, who's a multidisciplinary feminist research scholar in the areas of political economy, energy, gender, and human development, among many other specialties. Amongst a long list of international academic positions, she now holds Executive Director of the GenDev Center for Research and Innovation in Gurgaon, India. And she'll tell us more about her work shortly. Govind also wrote a book called Witch Hunts: Culture, Patriarchy, and Structural Transformation. And it's about modern-day witch hunting taking place in India and elsewhere around the world. In this hour, we'll be talking about what she found in her years of research into the phenomena of witch hunting, trying to understand what gives rise to this brutal practice, how it unfolds in communities, and also comparing current-day witch hunting with historical witch hunting and what the practice tells us about men, women, and different kinds of power. I'm so excited to talk to you because of the book that we're going to be talking about and get a completely new and fresh perspective on witch hunting.
Let me do my best.
Yeah, thank you. So you're currently Executive Director and Professor at the GenDev Center for Research and Innovation. Can you tell me a little bit about the GenDev Center?
Gender means gender and development. It does mainly research, and through research we have and advocacy also, and we have conducted research on land rights, energy, and witch hunts, and global supply chains. So this is the major four areas that Gender Center in a short history since 2019 has concentrated.
So you wrote a book called Witch Hunts: Culture, Patriarchy, and Structural Transformation. What is interesting to me, I think for like European and American listeners, witch hunts is a concept that happened hundreds of years ago in old Europe and old America. And it is, kind of like a quaint subject. But your research and this book shows us that witch hunt not only isn't gone, it's very much alive in parts of the world. And I absolutely love not just your observations of all of the different anecdotal stories about what happens in the various locales that you did your research in, but also the overall big analysis. And that's kind of what I want to dig into today. But maybe you can tell me a little bit, like, how did you get interested in witch hunts?
I was part of an indigenous people's movement. The state is called Jharkhand, and we were working on the forest rights of the people. It is in central India. And there we came across that two things. That one was the women were very much part of the movement. I started talking about the women's rights after a state is formed. So within Indian Union, there are states. Now, in this is about 25 years ago. I was a young student. When I started looking them, then I came across that there was this practice of witch hunts. Women who were not kind of aligning with the mainstream, indigenous societies, rebellious women, or trying to show their individuality or express their rights. So this is how I got into the subject. So I and my partner at that time, we were both part of the movement, and we decided that we would write a chapter in a book. A book was Women in Forest Rights. So I grew up admiring indigenous peoples, working with them, and I still do that. But I couldn't, with my feminist thinking, I could not ignore this. Then I studied that state first. The state was formed, women did not get the right. They got the right which the other women have right to vote and other things, but not really getting rid of this kind of violence or not getting the equality within the state. So I became more disappointed, but visited other states also where this practice was. This is how I got interested into it. And more, the variations of it, the reasons for it.
You have a lot of stories in your book about what actually happens in villages and how someone may become accused and persecuted as a witch. How did you find these stories and what was the field work like?
Because of the language and cultural difference, because I come from the caste society and not indigenous society, but I have a lot of friends, being the some scholars, some women activists from indigenous areas, and they were my associates in terms of the field workers, interpreters. So with their help I did that. And since most of them were women, I think a couple of them were men also in different places, they were quite sympathetic to the questions that I was raising in order to understand. And they have also known me that I'm not the one who really cast aspersions on the indigenous societies, because I would always compare the mainstream Indian society with that. That helped me to get their empathy, working together, a relationship of respect and trust was more important. So, with their help, I did the work. And the women also narrated the stories in a very frank, candid manner, that what they have gone through. My approach was really looking at the culture of the indigenous societies, how this was accepted as part of the cultural system, because there is a lot of discussion on indigeneity of the indigenous peoples, that their culture is should not be disturbed, and there is an onslaught by Hinduism, by Christianity, and of course now capitalism, emerging kind of capitalism. Or I wanted to explore what is in the cultural systems and in the belief systems that this is being accepted and not being critiqued or criticized as part of the indigeneity. That was bothering me. I also believe a cultural mixing. I mean, cultural sensitivity is okay, but I believe in the cultural plurality. If something is good in Africa, I would be very happy to take that. If something good is in Europe, very happy to take that. So I don't divide this cultural knowledge in the compartments. And then there is a plurality of change. Along with this, there are also other material factors. There is a kind of capitalism which is different from the US, for example, where is a full blown capitalism. Indigenous areas, you find that there is a growing capitalism, so there is a plurality. Indigenous societies, mainstream India society, than US or Western Europe. So these are the material and cultural variations. So our study was really put in this kind of context, so looking at the cultural and belief system and not treat it as a part of the indigenous culture and belief system, from where it has come. So in this approach, when I said that I interviewed about 110 persons in Jharkhand. Why focusing on Jharkhand? Jharkhand is the highest number of the witches, and also we were working there for the state formation there. So that was my first exposure. In these 110 cases, 42 were related to the land rights of women. When women wanted to have their rights to land, then they were denounced as witches, or they asserted their rights, whether married, unmarried, or if they made claims to their land, then or property. Sometimes it was housing, sometimes even some utensils, which is not highly valuable by any means. So these are the claims. Whenever they made, they were attacked. So land property was one highest. Second was causing illness. Sometimes both were working, so it is not one kind of thing. Illness was getting fever, getting a typhoid, getting cholera. They would go and consult a local healer or doctor, ki what is the reason, and he would not give the name, but he would say that that person lives in that corner of the village, indication of the locale, and that is a woman. So mostly they were women. They were warned that to leave the village first. If they did not leave, then I think second warning was also there. If they are married, then the husband also would be told that you have nothing to do, you drive her out. But they could not drive out, then they would be killed in the village with the chopping of the head. And so it was most brutal kind of thing. And then whole village would condone it. Ki she was a witch. They are not killing a human being, they are killing a witch. So this kind of brutality became very difficult to understand.
The scapegoating, finding someone to blame for misfortune, seems to be a big factor.
That's right. There is also scapegoating. That is the third reason. But scapegoating was particularly focusing on the health, particularly if a child died. There was a scapegoating also that if the harvest is not good, then a woman has cause. So I call that as a scapegoating. Also, envy. And particularly now we get two kinds of cases more. One is the envy, jealousy of our fields are the same size, but why your field is producing more? If your field has produced more, maybe you are a witch, you have caused something, and they would women would be labeled like this. These are the new things that have come up with the emerging capitalism. So people fertilizing, people going and migrate, the migration money, building their good houses. So your brother, your sister, sometimes they would blame you that you are a witch kind of thing, because they don't have really knowledge where you are working and what you are doing.
So mysteriously, your neighbor is doing much better than you, and
That's
then,
right. Yeah.
yeah.
Assertion of agency. So we have in India this 33% representation of women in the rural areas. In the representation in panchayat is the local government. So this was done about the last 20, over 20 years. This has become part of the constitution. And in this, some women have become very active. If you are an active ward is the village subdivision. If you have become an active ward member, then she is also denounced as a witch. If she asserts her right, if the husband is weak or partner is weak, then she's also called a witch. Even some cases have been where there is a worship of the unconventional god, Hindu god. So these are some of the things. If you are going around, if somebody makes a pass at you, so sexual approach. He says that she has done this, she behaves like this. So these are the cases that are happening now. In the last 5, 7 years, I have noticed that. Earlier, this was not the case.
So many things to touch on. I hear when a woman asserts political voice or right, that is a threat. When they get involved in spiritual matters, that is a threat. When you acquire wealth that your neighbors are envious of, that is a threat. But what's interesting to me is that, and you did say this, that this is like highly gendered, highly directed at women chiefly.
That's right.
Can you talk about why? And just a little background. So these are patriarchal societies, correct? They're indigenous, but they're patriarchal and patrilocal.
It is patrilineal. It is, I mean, they are the features of patriarchy. So, patrilineal, patrilocality, male dominance in general that you find, so male superiority, and the capitalist or capitalism has really given push to these. I'm not saying that all these kind of things are, some people believe that they are part of the capitalism, but I think they are part of the capitalism, but there are cultural traces also of the patriarchy.
So why is witchcraft so gendered as female?
I think it is gendered for a couple of reasons. One is that a resourceless person, whether a woman or man, would be subject to violence in general. And so that is here it is the woman. Woman is resourceless in patrilineal and patrilocal societies I'm talking about. That she doesn't have any house in her name, she doesn't have land in her name. So the result is that when she gets somehow makes an effort to have these resources, they would be driven out. Also, they have the indigenous knowledge more. They raise children, so herbs and all this. Since women deal with raising the children, so they will be a lot more interested in getting some medicines. Being woman itself has made this kind of thing. That is that women are being treated as a kind of, I don't like to call them vulnerable because they are very strong, but they are made vulnerable by this. So their resourcelessness, and also their less exposure to the modernity, modern forces. They are so confined to household and their community and the labor that they do, unpaid care, productive work, that they don't get any time. The capabilities are really undeveloped in terms of dealing with the outside world. So these are the things that also really make them subject to attacks.
They're an easy subject to scapegoat in that they're saddled with keeping the traditions of the culture through child rearing, but they also have no sort of ownership in the culture.
That's right. No ownership of resources, no control over its produce. The house they live, either it is a parental family or the husband's family, they don't have any share in that. So you are transferred from one vulnerable situation to another situation where you have so rightslessness and then limited capability because of the system being overburdening of the work with productive and reproductive care work. So and lack of decision making, I mean, you are not exposed to outside, or you are not allowed to expose yourself to the outside forces or outside how to deal with the situation, outside problems. This is the enforced incapability that is women are saddled with, and they are trapped in this. And when the modernity comes, it is with great deal of effort. Oh, women are not capable. They are backward. They don't have the knowledge, so we can't have them. We have good intentions. I mean, this is how it goes on. There is a very subtle discrimination. These are the discriminatory norms. I have worked recently on the social norms, how gendered they are. And these gendered norms are also very much in indigenous societies. So, and remote rural.
Another thing that really struck me about these stories is that an accusation is as good as a conviction. Once you have attracted that kind of attention, once you're being accused or targeted, it's like a circular thing. You're already marked for punishment, marked as a witch. And that in itself
That's
is,
right.
you can't defend yourself.
You are very right. There is internalization of this among women also, and among a lot of women, if not all women, that she is like this, and this is part of our system. So if you question that, then they say, in our area, this happens. So what happens, you don't question. We have the caste system, and even some very kind of knowledgeable people believe in caste system, which is very horrible kind of situation. So by default options, you don't question that. So some women, they also find it difficult to support unless you have gone through the trauma, unless they have gone through the trauma of being denounced as a witch.
And it also strikes me as like if women in any society are living in fear of being pointed at or living in fear of accusation, that makes the female population pretty obedient, I would think.
Yes, obedience is also nurtured both in caste and indigenous societies. I went to a place of worship where the goddess was being worshipped in indigenous society. This man was treating, her husband was treating the sick people. So in that a small kind of, he called it a temple. So I asked the householder, the woman, I said, if he's not there, can we visit? I was there with another two men. And she says that, yes, you can go there, but I'm not responsible. I said, no, I want to visit that temple along with you. She says, I won't enter. Otherwise, I don't want to be denounced as witch. So even there are these temples where the goddess is there and they cannot enter that temple. So you look at kind of the contradiction of
Yeah,
this.
so women police themselves.
Women police themselves because they don't want to be denounced. They don't want to be in a worse situation. If they transgress these norms, then there is a potential fear of being denounced as a witch. So that's why they police themselves. This is a very calculative risk. This is not that they are just fearful of just like this. There is some consequence of this fear, and that's why they police themselves. And then they raise their daughters in this form, in these with these norms. So the generation after generation it goes on. If you don't be very bold, you don't be very vocal, you don't laugh loudly, these are the modesty norms that women are taught. You don't talk back.
Mhm.
The system makes you like this kind of thing. My mother, who was a landowner in her right, because there was no male member, she did not have a brother, so but she taught me, don't laugh loudly, don't look at it straight in one's eyes. I said, what do I do? You keep your eyes a bit down. And she had difficulty in in teaching me how to keep my eyes down if I wanted to look at someone. She did not succeed very much. So I remember these things when I'm saying that how the human psyche is formed, the women's psyche is formed, that how they need to be obedient, how they need to be passive beings. They can exist in the society only if they are not too active. Oh, you can be active in terms of working, in terms of carrying the orders of the male member. So this is in the family, this kind of this thing is nurtured. Family is a very, it's a nurturing institute, but it's a very cruel institute also in terms of the discrimination. We all have families, but we have to face that.
Yeah, and these structures are built and enforced within families. So it's kind of the smallest cell of this big patriarchal machine. You mentioned your mother owned land. You know, you describe women who own land have agency through their resources, and witch hunting is often directed at those women.
So this is the exceptional. It is the exceptionalism I'm talking about. My mother came from landlord family, okay,
I see.
a caste society. So we did not have this practice kind of thing. And she was given land by her father because she did not have any brother. If brother was there, no way she could have any land. And of course, my father tried very hard to get land from her, but she managed her own land. So this was the exception. That's what I'm giving her the example who has many feminist streak in her. But at the same time, she never gave land to any of her daughters. The three brothers were there, she gave them land because she thought she was unlucky not to have any brother. So that's why she got the land. Lack of land ownership by women is the norm that they cannot have. And in the rural areas and indigenous areas, the land is the primary source. You have the forest on that, you have the grain on that. So this happens in rural areas.
But it seems to me like a two-edged sword, is that it's a risk to be resourceless because that's a powerlessness in itself and a vulnerability to witch hunting, but also owning land is a risk as well because you incur the envy or the powers of the patriarchy who's going to want that land.
I little bit have a different opinion on that, what you are talking about. But this gives her the agency to fight back. She can fight back the domestic abuse. She can gain her voice, so her agency. She can assert herself. So what I want to say that women want resource in their name. They also know that resource gives them agency, voice, mobility. This gives them power to talk back, and not to face violence. It gives them. But if the system does not give, then they can't help it.
In the book, you mentioned there are widows who inherit the land from their husbands, who
Yeah,
then get their land. Their brother-in-laws accuse them of witchcraft, and they get chased off the land and get their land stolen.
that's right. They don't inherit the land, but they have the use rights to support
Gotcha.
themselves. After their husband dies, then they get this land. They have the use right on that land to support themselves and their children, raise them. And they manage that land. In that management of the land, of course, this was that it is indigenous area, they can't sell it. But even if they have the sell it, because now people have started selling by other means, so privatization of the land is happening in these areas. If they trying to assert their rights, then probably that causes the your point. That causes really the position there which they are likely to be attacked as the witch, because the other person, in most cases it was the husband's brother's sons who are going to get that resource. So snatching of the property, snatching of the land by force, and eliminating the claimant, the real claimant who should be there.
And you draw parallels, very interesting parallels with the witchcraft, witch craze, and witch trials in early Europe. Can you talk a little bit about what you found there in your research?
In early Europe, one of the things that I found, this was part of the mainstream society. The witch hunting was part of the mainstream society. That is one factor. Here it is confined to largely indigenous areas in India, also remote rural, which are like indigenous, though maybe caste, belonging to caste society. The other difference is papal authority and state both were involved in Europe in maintaining the system of witch hunts, in burning them or persecuting them, because they were seen as that they were against the religion, against the Christianity. Here it is not part of the religion, it is, except in one of few cases, it is the part of their cultural system or the system that they follow. And certainly there is no religious authority and no kind of state authority is involved in this. So that is the other difference that we find. Third thing, I think I found that it is the show of proof that you simply cannot say on the belief that a particular person is rich. You have not seen me doing something. Somebody comes and says, well, she was behaving like this in the night, or she was going with this kind of hair. When Europe tried to do that, the whole judiciary system or the state system was involved. Okay, if woman has done that, show the how she has caused the harm. What did she do? The kind of thing. Have you seen her giving the poison? Have you seen her kind of doing this? They wanted a proof. That was the difference. So these are the major differences that I find between Europe and Asia.
Also, you write about that, witch hunts in early Europe were focused on controlling women's sexuality and procreation. And I don't know if that's different than what happens in India.
India also, they control sexuality and procreation.
Hmm.
Although it is limited now, and it has been limited in indigenous areas. Sexual freedom is only in indigenous areas after one partner is dead or he has abandoned the woman. I mean, that he has run away from his responsibility, then it is possible. In caste society, that is also not possible. And these norms of caste society are very much traveled in the whole patriarchal system. So, patriarchy is becoming very strong in indigenous areas also. So, male authority. Otherwise, how do you control your progeny? Whose son? Whose children? Only woman knows. That is the basic reason where the patriarchal forces come and sexuality and progeny is controlled. In the indigenous societies, there is a difference between sons and daughters. although not so much as in the caste society. For example, there is no celebration if the son is born, and there is no crying if the daughter is born, which happens in most of the caste societies. But there is definitely a kind of attempt to have the male child so that the land can be managed, they can be made stronger. This man being around to protect you, the role of man as the protector of the family and the woman herself, whether in the form of a husband or partner or a son, that is there in that society also. So I find that is similarity between Europe and Asia.
It sounds to me, and you write about this too, that witch hunt is really sort of an extreme form of gender struggle.
Yes, that is true. Because I have noted about three, four, five cases of where women have struggled and they run away, and 22 cases of women who are alive. They were threatened by the husband. They were denounced as a witch by the husband. She ran away from there. They knew that what was the fate, and they ran away to a kind of unknown place, or to a very kind of sympathetic neighbor, but not neighborhood. They would be killed to another village which they don't know. So that is one thing that women are kind of, it's a gender struggle. Either you behave like this, otherwise you would be killed. So it is not discrimination, it is not dispossession only, it is elimination. You are eliminated if you don't behave like this. So this is the war kind of thing that happens. And this is the patriarchal forces which are kind of developing it. And my fear is it will develop into misogyny. That is the way that things are happening more and more. In COVID, for example, a lot of women were denounced. Everybody knew that COVID has affected everybody. But even then, witch cases became quite rampant during COVID period. Jharkhand.
Really?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Particularly a male child, if they kind of got the fever and died, or he got the cholera and died, then it is the caused by the woman, mother. Sometimes mother, all kind of nonsense goes on, that she sucks the blood with the from the heart without anybody noticing. So this is the fear that generated among that how witch can cause harm. So being witch is the worst form of attack that you can face, and no
Hmm.
getting away from that. That you have the eye, so evil eye, you cast an evil eye, you poison the food not by administering something but by looking at the food. And the people who accuse are mostly men, maybe 5 to 10% are women. So that's why I call it a gender war.
You talk about, and I find this fascinating, that communities are caught up in personal, smaller power struggles between the genders in particular.
Mhm.
Can you
Mhm.
speak to that at all?
One is that the attacks are personal, but they are condoned by the community. This is the system that I was talking about. So the brother-in-law or the close relative, the next likely successor of those resources, he would be the one who would be in most cases causing the accusation. He would accuse the person that she is a witch because he is going to gain those resources. A community does not benefit from the resources. But whereas community is concerned, community is a yes person. I mean, he says that is the rightful act. So if she is driven out, if she is killed, and if she disappears in the forest, I mean, a lot of them now they are either disappearing or they are killed in the forest. Earlier they were killed in the village. But after the legal changes, now they are not killed in the villages. Here he has to save the village from the crisis. If you don't kill the witches, that is what I heard in many places. If you don't kill the witches, then the witch is going to kill you. So it is the struggle is whether one person has died already, which has killed somebody. But now, if you let her be there, then she is going to kill or cause harm to the village.
So, what is being done and what is being effective and what is not in abolishing witch hunting?
What is done is really is some laws have been made state level.
Hmm.
Each state has the kind of deals with it. There is no law by central government still. All states don't have even law. Some state, but law is very very weak. I mean, one state is the law is only about 2,000 fine and 3 months imprisonment, kind of. So the law is, and some judicial judgments that have come. They say that since it is a part of the belief system, so the person who has caused this or who has killed the person should not be really given a kind of very high either life imprisonment or death penalty. It is not considered a murder. It is considered witch killing, like it used to happen 20 years ago before the feminist launched the kind of thing. Second is that police attitude. They also believe, oh, it's a part of indigenous society, it's part of their culture, let it be. So unless the person is really killed, they don't care when the person is being branded. When the process starts, they don't care. So the person is harassed, police just dismisses it or it goes and pacifies and situation continues. It is the branding that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, but it's cultural relativism, is what I hear.
That's right. It is cultural relativism. It's part of the culture. So that's why the kind of reduced punishment or
They don't want to touch it,
I
really.
call it condoning. I mean, condoned kind of thing. They have to give some kind of, so it is cultural relativism. Other thing is that what we need is really is raising awareness of the people, organizing communities, talking of these kind of measures that they are wrong. That has not happened. Some NGOs are doing it, but those who are working in indigenous area, they think that majority of them that this is a part of their cultural system and we should not really attack, otherwise we are looking down on them. I wanted to present this. I'm not finding a platform because they think that this is the practice that talks of brutality in an indigenous society and that should not be discussed. So there is this kind of implicit criticism that why you are doing this kind of thing, but they are already so neglected. So why you are talking of their culture? Some would say, who are you to talk about their culture? Let them talk. But I think I can talk your culture, cultural differences. I can talk about my cultural differences. So the knowledge is, I think it is a public good and it should be treated like this.
I couldn't agree more. I think this idea that human behavior can be protected within some kind of cultural sacredness or cultural isolation is just not good for us. We are all, I don't want to sound cliche, but we're all one human family. And yes, we have cultural differences that we're all born into that we don't necessarily have a choice in. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at each other's cultures and critically think about the practices that we, all of us, do in our different ways.
That's right. UN is one body that has accepted it. In 2021, there was this paper on cultural rights, and they have talked about both cultural mixing and cultural critiquing. That's very good kind of thing, but it has still not become part of the NGO community, non-governmental organization, a state kind of thing. They think that they belong to that society, you belong to this society, so you should be talking, particularly when, as such, gender question is seen as that it's coming from the West. even my
Absolutely, and I
even
get
my
that.
mother, I'm left. I'm not kind of thing. But when these progressive people talk like this, then it really bothers me.
I'm with you there. And especially, we live in a world where hideous, violent misogyny is part of so many different cultures in different ways.
Mhm.
So I insist on, as a woman, having the right to talk about any culture and how women are treated within any culture on this planet.
Yeah.
I think it's crucial that we do, in fact.
We talk of one world, we talk of other things, one world, globalization. When it comes to the question that are the related to feminism, related to women's rights, then of course it is the part of the culture, that this is part of the culture. And then, oh, change would happen, and one doesn't know when it will happen. I mean, people have seen decades and decades.
Yeah.
Change is happening, that is true, but change is happening with all this kind of criticism and by women themselves in most cases. Now some men are coming along.
So I'm curious, what impact has feminist activism had on this issue in India? And also, how are Indigenous women fighting this fight? How are they making a change?
First thing, impact is happened at a very limited scale. Impact is there, but it is a very limited scale. There are some journalists, there are some professors who are writing about this. Not continuously. I want a little more about this kind of thing. But there are some young scholars who are doing work now on the witch question. Then there are these women. They have awarded 3 women with the honor kind of government state honor who have fought the witch hunt, witch hunting practice. I mean, saved women from being hunted. So there is this kind of recognition that is happening. Demand has come to for the stricter laws, and demand is also being to plug these holes, the legal holes. That the process need to be questioned, branding needs to be questioned. It is not really the only when the final act happened then the police intervenes. So these are the things that are being debated.
In the book, you talk about misogyny and social norms and the individual attitudes as a critical part of patriarchy. Eliminating witch hunts requires dealing with this misogyny and creating a new kind of masculinity. Can you talk about that?
Some people talk of the toxic masculinity and the masculinity itself. Positive masculinity or new masculinity, I have not come across in India any part that is being addressed, even by feminist movement. Right now, there is a lot of kind of being discussed about misogyny, how these hate crimes are increasing. And now the misogyny is being questioned because if you take, for example, the case of rape, and now the rape is not happen only as a rape kind of forced sex act by one person to another, but it's a kind of gang rape in most cases that is happening, and she's brutally killed after that. And before killing, she is brutally tortured. Now, this is the kind of most brutal form of misogyny, and misogyny is now coming in the major kind of debate that why the misogyny is increasing, what should be done to control misogyny or to reform. New masculinity we have not talked about, but I raised with this point at one point that, and I was told no masculinity is a decent one. That's what. If you talk of the masculinity, it means that you are talking of the male power. We are at that stage in terms of both academia and also the non-governmental organization. But there is a need to address this thing, how they are behaving, how they are respecting women. These are the elements of the new masculinity that need to be addressed. Plus, I think if you take US, if you take Russia, if you take China, if you take India, these 4 powers come to my mind. Everywhere I find that democracy is on declining, democratic forces. And misogyny and patriarchy are very much part of it. That is that. Although we have the black commandos, we have very efficient women in the army, women have come into sports, all these things are happening. But attitude towards women is not changing, which is a kind of strange thing to me. But there is need to talk about because we have now with variation, we have the men who are supporting women's rights, although they are, you can count them on fingers, but nevertheless, they are there, which was not earlier there.
So some men have joined the fight, so to speak.
That's right. Some men have joined the women's struggle fights. Yeah.
Hmm.
And also against witch hunts. But witch hunts, even lesser number of the men are there. Those who work with the indigenous peoples, they don't want to talk about it. They say that they want their acceptability with the indigenous peoples, and they don't touch this subject.
It's taboo.
It's a taboo, right? They are already discriminated ones. When you started talking about the indigenous people, then probably you have to need to think that everything about them is good, good, good. No problem areas. But I think there is a need to talk about the problem areas as you talk the problem areas in other societies also. It's a living society, it is a human society. And this kind of where particularly half of the population it lives in fear and in economic dependence on others. What kind of, it may be indigenous, it may be caste society, it may be capitalist society. I think we need to question that system. So I believe strongly in that.
Yeah, I so agree with you. But I also think it raises is such a interesting question is that we in the West, I think, assume that patriarchy, patriarchal rules and hierarchy and inequality, that it's exclusive to state building or that it came with nation state building. And seeing highly unequal patriarchal patrilineal societies in an indigenous format is very goes against what we believe in that it's a non-state society, so to speak. And yet you have these same gender issues, these same inequalities and issues of patriarchy.
That was my point, Ali. And that's why I thought that if we take the debate to culture and belief, that it was non-state, but it was not non-culture. They had the culture, they had the belief system. So we need to really look at that culture. We need to explore what is the element there that gave rise to patriarchy. How the matrilineal societies or matriarchal societies, how they change into patrilineal and patriarchal society. What was that kind of process? Not capitalism alone, but capitalism did influence. It gave a big push, and certainly it is a better form than feudal system. But when it comes to question of women, then patriarchy is becoming stronger and stronger. And now I don't know what will happen in other places also because there is so much pressure would be women to produce children. This demographic deficit that Japan, South Korea, China face, now they are projecting the same thing in India. So women would be kind of forced to produce children. And what would be the consequences? Men still don't take care. With all this unpaid care debate and people, economists who are writing about unpaid care, don't do any work at home. Why don't you participate in kind of mothering and caregiving? So this is the attitude is very kind of and this happens in among very much among indigenous peoples also. This is women's work.
So you have this hard division between the productive work, so to speak, is the domain of men, and they want to keep it that way. And all of the work in the home, the reproductive home and care, is women's work, and they want to keep those hard lines between those divisions.
And that's why it is leading to a gender war. Because women on the feminists are talking about the unpaid recognition of unpaid care, very much rightfully so. Unpaid care work, which takes so much their time. You can put aside your work, but you cannot put aside feeding children. They would die, kind of thing.
We have the same debate here, and in America in particular, there is absolutely no help or provision for care work, for caring for children by society. Mothers are 100% unsupported in our society, unsupported economically, politically, and in every other way.
Not even 6 months of maternity leave.
Oh, not even.
Yeah, which is
Not even, not
we
even
have
close.
now. Yeah.
I want to end with a quote that you have in your book that I really, really like. It says, if we rewound the clock of human history, there may well be no recurrence of patriarchy. The importance of such an approach is that it helps us affirm that even in the present context, another world is possible, a world without beliefs in witchcraft, certainly a world without witch hunts and without patriarchy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just love that. I
Either
just love that.
I'm too optimistic with all this kind what is happening.
Reading your book about the incredible brutality that women risk in the locales in India that you study and elsewhere, I fear for women, but I also, there's so much hope as well with women sort of linking arms and insisting on a different world.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't give up hope either one.
We don't
Not,
give up hope. That's
no,
right.
no, we don't give up hope. Not on misogyny, not with full blown patriarchy.
We keep doing our work.
Yeah, we keep striking at these institutions, whether they are at the individual level or whether they are at the collective level and or state level, and that gives us creativity and innovation.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you so very much for talking to me. It was such an interesting conversation. Thank you for listening to Subject to Power. You can find the show online at subjecttopower.com or subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts. I'd love to know your thoughts on these conversations, so please drop a note on the website or find us on social media. The best way to support the show is to rate and review Subject to Power on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. Subject to Power is written, hosted, and produced by me, Elle Kamihira. Audio engineering is done by Jason Sheesley at Abridged Audio. Cover art by B. Johnson, and music by Beware of Darkness.